Welcome to the 2018 to 2019 NCFCA webinar series. The goal of NCFCA webinars is to facilitate a platform where thought leaders and subject matter experts can provide insight on topics relevant to current debate resolutions and speech events. Our desire is to provide a platform that encourages mentorship, real-life application, and competitive excellence. Our intention for this webinar is to help provide educational context for interpretation, character development, and blocking from our guest speakers' unique perspectives and experiences. Please keep in mind that we will not be addressing rules questions in this webinar, as all rule-related questions should be directed to the speech committee. Consider this as you craft your questions for our Q&A time, and take advantage of the fact that you have an opportunity to engage with NCFCA parents and coaches who can provide insight into the art of interpretation. Our format for this evening's webinar is going to begin with a 30-minute conversation that will launch with beginning to watch a little bit of a duo interpretation demo for inspiration. After watching this demo snippet, we will unpack the concepts of character development and blocking. And just a quick reminder as we watch this great duo in the beginning, this is a duo from a few years ago, so you should keep in mind that rules are revised from year to year. And you should read the rules as you dive into blocking and developing your characters for your own piece this year to make sure that you're in compliance. So with that being said, we love inspiring you with past works, and we hope that watching this duo is going to help you understand the broader concepts of interpretation as we dive into them during our presentation time. So after our conversation, we will move into our giveaway, which is going to include your choice of an icebreaker games book, which would be especially helpful for a coach, and then a duo interpretation blocking book. And so we will give you the option, if you are the winner of this giveaway, one winner will be chosen randomly, and then one winner will be chosen based on engagement by asking questions for the Q&A session. After the giveaway, we will jump into addressing your questions during our live Q&A. So please do take advantage of this opportunity by submitting your questions via the Q&A button that's available on your screen. And if you run into any technical difficulties during tonight's presentation, feel free to reach out for help in the chat section, which is separate from the Q&A section, and our back-end support will be happy to help you in any way that they can. So with that, it's my honor to invite Christy and Heather to join me on screen as I introduce them to you this evening.
Hi there.
A second to hop on. Hello. So I will start off with Christy. Christy has been a classroom teacher and speech coach for public high school before working with NCFCA students over the last few years. Her family has affiliated with 3 different NCFCA regions due to active duty military service. And Christy has also taught workshops and camps in addition to coaching widely in and out of region in preparation for the competition season. And we have a quote from Christy, just to give you a little glimpse of the great insight you're about to receive. She said, "I love seeing kids really grow through hard work, careful study, and active competition. They emerge more enlarged, and it's an honor to be a part of that growth." And Christy, it's an honor for us to be a part of this time here with you. So thank you for joining us. Our next speaker is Heather Newman. Heather Newman is also an NCFCA parent and coach. A little quote from Heather, which will give you a glimpse into her fun personality, which you will see throughout this webinar. Heather said, there is a power your voice has. It has the ability to make a lasting impact, and all you have to do is use it. Heather is a speaker coach for a TEDx and has taken on adult clients. She's also the founder of Lasting Impact and has been blessed to have coached thousands of students throughout the nation. So Heather, thanks for joining us this evening. I guess I should make a quick introduction of myself, which is not scripted, but hopefully I remember myself enough to say. I'm Natalia Rosa. I'm Director of Education with NCFCA. I was a competitor in my high school years and then graduated, finished my degree. So have kind of had a fun experience of being in the league, then being an alum, and then also being a part of leadership. So it's an honor to be with you all this evening. But with that, we are going to join you as participants for just a minute as we dive into showing you that duo interpretation snippet. And I know Heather was going to give us just a little bit of background information on this duo since she has a connection to the speakers.
Sure. This is a duo team of Newman. It was actually a birthday gift to me this last year, just last month. And for my birthday, my boys decided to relearn a speech that they did 3 years ago. And they got in their tournament attire and they completely went back to the blocking and everything that they did from It's the Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. And it was actually one of our very favorite duos and speeches that they have done. But it has so many great examples in it of characterization and blocking. And I'm so excited to be able to share this with you. So I'm giving you the caveat that AJ now has a beard and looks like a man because he is. This was done, this originally was done 3 years ago. So super thrilled to now have this memento because it's just such a precious memory in our hearts. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to share this with everyone. All right.
Marley was dead as a doornail. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of this story. Scrooge is squeezing, wrenching, grasping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Nobody ever stopped him in the streets to say,
"My dear Scrooge, how are you?"
"Ah, humbug!" A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house.
I'm busy in my counting house. 1, 2.
It was cold, dark, and bleak.
3.
Old Scrooge had a very small fire, but his clerk, Mr. Bob Cratchit, had a fire so very much smaller. Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you! Merry Christmas, Mr. Cratchit! Ha!
Fred, my nephew.
Humbug! Christmas time a humbug? Surely you don't mean that!
I do! What right have you to be dismal? What right have you to be merry? You're poor enough.
Come then, Uncle. What right do you have to be dismal? You're rich enough.
You keep Christmas your way. Leave me alone!
Christmas time is a time for forgiving, a charitable time. I believe in it, and I say God bless it. Uncle!
Good afternoon.
Why can't we be friends?
1.
God rest ye merry gentlemen, thy children.
Christian cheer. Idle people marry. We need to decrease the surplus population. I suppose you want the whole day off tomorrow.
If when convenient, sir.
It's not convenient.
It is but once a year, sir.
A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. Be here all the earlier the next morning. Such a low fire. Darkness is cheap. Ding dong. Marty? Marty is dead. I won't believe it.
Jacob Marley, what do you want from me? You will be haunted by 3 spirits.
I'd rather not.
Expect the first, when the bell tolls 1.
Couldn't I take him all at once, Jacob, and get...
All right. Well, I know it's hard to pull everyone away from the middle of a great interpretation, but we'll be sure to send you the link so you can enjoy the full thing after the presentation today. But let's go ahead and dive into these concepts of character development and blocking, especially now that we've gotten some inspiration from that great speech. And I know everyone is eager to get to some questions later. We already have some great questions rolling in. So let's start off by talking about this idea of an interpretation being breathing life into literature is a way that it's been described, and characters and blocking are all a part of how we do this and bring the story to life. But let's talk a little bit about the concept of originality. So what does it mean to take a story that perhaps has been written by someone else, perhaps is a Bible story, perhaps is an originally written piece? What does it mean to take that script and really make it your own and breathe life into it?
Yeah, so people need to understand that a lot of times, like in the case with the Christmas Carol, it wasn't actually our very first option that year that we had. And so it is so much a process, and part of that process is really thinking about the characters, thinking about who the students want to be, who do they want to develop, and whatnot. So when we first decided to explore the Christmas Carol, I think that particular year, it was probably our 3rd, maybe our 4th, but when we first cut it and talked about it, one of the reasons why we chose it was because it was one of our favorites. We loved the Christmas Carol. We love the Muppets Christmas Carol, and so when we were thinking about it, we thought about the different characters of who both AJ and Jonah could be. And honestly, the first cut was at least 20 minutes long. I have the book here and the spots all in order of what we chose, and we had to understand which characters could we use. There are a ton of characters, and in particularly like with this, I think AJ ended up being 13 different snippets of characters, and where Jonah was, I think, 5 or 6, but mainly Ebenezer. But really what Christy and I both talk about is to be able to completely understand your characters, you need to go through a character worksheet. And NCFCA has a great character worksheet that I tell people you need to go through it for every single character so that you understand each one of them in their own unique way.
That's really helpful. Christy, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, yeah, just like the whole idea of interacting with a piece of literature is fundamental to interpretation. And literature is that kind of an art where, something happens between the author and what he wrote and the reader and what they take away from that. There's a new entity that grows out of that. When you as the reader engage with what the author has put on the page, and I think that's fundamentally what you're grasping at when you start to think about this idea of doing an interpretation is to, you know, to get to that place where you can say, wow, this, you know, there's this thing that I'm taking away from the story. And I think that's typically our starting point.
That's really good. So I love how you both reference that it's important that it be a piece that you care about and that you really, you become very familiar with. I love even that visual of you showing us the book with all of the little stickies in it. I definitely remember doing that. And I think that's really what it takes. You have to fall in love with that piece and really pour over it in order to even get into the next step of portraying those characters and those settings in front of an audience. So that's a good starting point and a good encouragement, because I know sometimes at the beginning of tournament season, there's that pressure of just getting the piece ready to perform. So a good encouragement for students and coaches to remember a lot of the work goes in on that behind the scenes point of just understanding what the story's about.
Yeah, it's probably the most, your script is what you're going to be using, and that's a lot of times why I often don't like to use plays. Not, you can use them, but there's so much more depth and emotions and empathy that you gain by going through a piece of literature versus a play. A play moves very quickly, and so you're like, oh, I just wish there was, you know, the narration that you can then sometimes put into dialogue or understanding their thought process that you don't have in a play. And I will say, the more you know your piece, you know, inside and out, the more emotions and the passion that you're going to be able to bring forth to the stage or classroom.
Yeah, that's a great encouragement. Yeah, and it's making me think of even back when I did an interp. You know, one of my favorite pieces was a play. It was The Miracle Worker, on the life of Helen Keller and her teacher, Anne Sullivan. But you're right, there was a lot of behind the scenes research that I did to get context myself for what that story was about. Because sometimes the play doesn't give you as much context. But I remember watching documentaries on the lives of these individuals and reading some other books and biographies. And that can seem like, whoa, way beyond the scope of what an interpretation piece is, but that really is what takes you to the heart of storytelling and then how to communicate that story to an audience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The character worksheets too will, it not only is getting into the mindset of them, but it can also help set up the scene as far as what are they wearing. And I always tell kids, if you do not know who you're being, whether it's you're trying to be like Uncle Bill, or in the case of AJ portraying Bob Cratchit, he was obviously trying to channel his inner Kermit the Frog. He knew what he was doing. If you don't know what you're doing as an actor or who you're trying to channel, your judges are not going to have a clue. And so if you're trying to be someone, even if you just have to visualize them or who you're trying to portray. And by filling out your character worksheet, you're going to be able, sometimes you even give them a backstory. You know, they might be a lesser character, but all of a sudden now, you know, things that happened to them 5 years ago. Your audience isn't necessarily going to know that, but you will, and that's going to help you understand them all the more.
That's good. So let's jump into that practical how-to of developing character worksheets. I know before we started this presentation, we were having a little conversation ourselves, and Christy, you had a really good point about the importance of empathy and how students can get to a point of developing empathy for their characters.
Yeah, one of my favorite just taglines really is empathy is a lot more important than your ethos when it comes to portraying a character. And you know, you may be very good and very competent as a speaker. You may have mastery of many accents. You can pop a pose like nobody's business. But if you aren't relating to the characters on some fundamental level, then that really shows, especially if the next person coming in after you is relating to those characters on that fundamental level, so that the ability to empathize and really gain an understanding of what the character is going through is, I think, critical to an authentic interpretation. And that means grappling with them. It means grappling with what the character is struggling with. It means grappling with what the character's motivations are, what their goals are, what they're striving for, and what frustrations are maybe besetting that attempt. And so, you know, sometimes that's not within your own realm of experience as a teenage person. And you do have to really ponder that and think about it and grapple with it and imagine and talk to people. And there's a whole lot of just internal figuring it out, I think, that precedes a very good interpretation.
Well, and it's an investment, right, Christy? I mean, when you are invested in your characters, you know, the emotional involvement that you are will portray out to your audience. And so that is a key aspect in your speech. If you're just going through the motions, we can usually tell.
That's a good point. So a couple of things from what you said, Christy and Heather, that stood out to me. I pulled out a few key questions students can ask themselves as they're identifying who their characters are. So one was, what is the motivation of each of these characters? And then what is their struggle? And you can look at that from different angles. Their internal struggle, so maybe the behind the scenes, what all of the characters don't necessarily see, but depending on the book, you know, maybe it's the journal entries, or maybe it's the thought process that you as a reader get insight to. What are those internal struggles? And then what also are the external struggles that they're encountering throughout this plot line that they have to learn how to overcome, or maybe they succumb to, and what is the fallout from those struggles? So all of that to say, it reminded me of a recent quote that I heard. I was listening to a speech from one of the main writers for Pixar, and she said, "I don't even know who a character is until I have seen them struggle." And I think that really does hone in on a key point for interpretations for students to remember. They really have to dive into what is the struggle that the character is encountering. So one question that I'm seeing pop in as we are having a conversation about empathy and struggle is, how does that apply to more humorous storylines? Because it's easier to see what the struggle would be with the more dramatic or serious undertones, but how do you identify character struggle for the funny stories?
Well, I think most humor is actually trying to make a point about something that we need to consider, perhaps in a weightier way. You know, when we're laughing at something, it's because something needs to be laughed at. And why does it need to be laughed at? Is it, you know, is it something that we need to avoid falling into, and that's why we're laughing at it? Is it, you know, is it something that just is off the path we ought to be on? I don't know. It's so there's usually a reason why we want to laugh at something. Hopefully not because we enjoy someone else's pain. That's, you know, that's where I sort of differentiate between what would be quality, you know, a high level of humor, and just, you know, kind of your baseline humor that's perhaps not worth as much time to invest in. So, but you know, a lot of the great literature really is very sophisticated humor and satire aimed at societal problems and cultural issues and things that are very worth our consideration. So
that's good encouragement. Heather, did you have anything to add to that? The concept of humor?
I was just going to say, almost in all literature stories, there's conflict, whether it be internal of how am I going to deal with this situation, or it's external and overcoming. And so and there's so many different storylines in any interpretation that you sometimes have to just figure out, okay, again, what characters are we going to portray? Or, what is our message or theme? I always talk about it's like a string weaving in and out through your story. And so trying to find that thread that's going to be woven into your tapestry, which is your story and your interpretation. And so there's always a place for smiles and chuckles and laughs, even in the most serious of piece sometimes. And that's life. That's the type of thing that we often we gravitate to. And so I encourage interpreters to look for the smiles if they are doing a serious piece. And they are there. They can find them. It can sometimes even just be in the pause of how you say it, or the repeat. Those, both of those rules or the repeat rule is often sometimes if you say it once and then all of a sudden you go, oh, the second time, oh, the way they said that was kind of funny, so.
But even just with humorous pieces, I mean, there's nothing wrong with things we take delight in and with laughter and with joy. And sometimes we just need to laugh at ourselves because frankly, sometimes we're taking ourselves far too seriously. So I think there's a place for that. I definitely do. So.
That's very good encouragement. So another topic that comes up then as you're thinking about how to empathize, how to understand your character's struggles, is how do you make sure that your portrayal is going to be sincere and authentic? Because one of those common pitfalls is just to rely on the stereotypes of, okay, this is, a young girl, so of course all young girls act this way. Or, right? Yeah.
I yet to have known anybody, and I was telling some kids at a camp this week, this is not what any young girl does. They don't do this, nor do they twirl. I think it's funny that we put these positions into our bodies because, oh, now this shows us a girl. We need to think out of the box when we are portraying different characters.
Well, the thing about stereotypes too is they don't require any empathy. They don't at all. They're not meant, we're not meant to empathize with them. That's what makes them stereotypes. They're just a prototype. And so there's nothing there beyond that surface presentation for us to connect with. And so they do tend to be very shallow representations for that reason.
That's good. Okay. So there's an interesting question that came in that I'm going to pull in now because it applies to the topic. Sharon wants to know, how do you empathize with the, in quotations, bad guy in your story?
Well, again, I think you have to consider, why is he bad? Like, what made him bad? Is there a reason for that? Or is it pure evil? Because that's also, certainly true of many of the villains that are out there. They are a representation of very pure evil. I do have a caveat when I'm coaching about how deeply you empathize with something that is, very, very dark, because you don't want to empathize deeply with something that's straight evil. You really don't.
Right.
But I think still you can indicate and suggest those things without, going down the dark path yourself on your character worksheet. So, I think again, just understanding the difference between, okay, this character has had a lot of hard knocks and is now bitter and dark and hard-hearted and callous, and that's what makes him mean, is different from, somebody who is demon possessed or satanic or something like that. So
yeah, Natalia, you brought up, you had to go research, and oftentimes, in the case of like Ebenezer, Jonah, when he originally did it, was 14, maybe 15. He had no idea what it was like to be so hardened and bitter And you know, it was something that honestly we struggled with all season, going, do you understand where he's coming from? You know, this isn't a somewhat comical type of character that you're portraying, but just like if you do someone with a disability, you might need to know what Tourette's really looks like if you're going to portray somebody with that. So doing the research like you had to do with Miracle Worker is sometimes where we have to go. And there's different ages too. You know, when you're looking at your young competitors, 12 years old versus an 18-year-old, there's a huge span there that when they do start younger, they're able to build upon it and build upon it and build upon it, where they might be able to explore that later on. There have been many pieces that we've thought about that, you know, my kids or kids that I've coached just haven't been ready for. Mm-hmm. And so that's something too, as a coach, you need to maybe look at and explore it, but maybe it's just not that year.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think there definitely is that line of congruency, because you want students to be stretched and to grow, but you also want there to be enough of an alignment between who these characters are and the storyline and what the student can emotionally comprehend and dive into and relate to. And I think this is going to answer a lot of the questions that are coming in, because I'm seeing some people ask, you know, how can I empathize with a character who isn't as well developed in the story? Or what do I do for speeches where it's a very short storyline, maybe something like, they didn't say this, but I'm thinking of a Dr. Seuss story, where the characters may not even be real people, but they're imagined characters. How can you still empathize and develop those characters well if there's not a lot of content provided?
Well, why are they there? I mean, this is one of the questions to ask, because an author has deliberately put every single character in there for some purpose. And a lot of the minor characters really are there to draw something else out of the major character. And that may be their only function. And if you can even understand that, then it gives you a starting point with even those minor characters. Like, what is their purpose in, you know, in the story in relation to the main character, the main conflict? You know, they're contributing, or else they wouldn't be there.
There's a story behind every character, honestly, just like we are, whether or not they're a person's a person, no matter how small, you know. I mean, so though they all have a personality or a persona even. You know, one of my favorite duo speeches was the Sneetches. And it's the message behind it. It came out in the way they empathized with them. And so it was in their voices that this message was important, as far as, you know, whether or not you have stars upon thars. And then there were Sneetches that were, you know, had their snoots in their air and the air, and it worked. It was a story in itself, regardless of animals, creatures, people. They all have the ability to tell a story.
That's really good. Okay, so we're going to move on, because I know we have a lot of questions to get to. Let's talk a little bit about adding physical traits such as posture and facial expressions and vocalization once you have that understanding of who your character is. How do you move into the practical expressions of how they're going to stand and talk and interact throughout the speech?
You're picking and choosing from a lot of different things. And so you do have different categories. There's a whole lot you can do with your face. And I think that's one of the most important parts of the character. I think that's where the emotion is communicated. I like to tell people to think of emojis. Why are we in emoji culture? Because you can do so much with just a face, right? and if you look at, we have libraries of facial expressions in emoji speak now. And so, like all those choices are available to you in an interpretation as well. All those different kinds of expressions and emotions that you can add onto your face. So that's a good starting place Just if you're relating to what the character is feeling and communicating, then that's a good starting place.
I agree. Your face is going to be the number one key indicator of having your audience be able to read you on where we're going. You know, I mean, if anyone has had me as a judge, they know that I am right there, either with you smiling or, oh yeah, that's so true. You know, so it's like we're doing a mirror, and it's so important that you are portraying the emotions that you want to, so that we are expressing it with you, and you're bringing us on that journey with you. So if you're up there going, and somebody died, you know, we're left with, okay, she's smiling about this. Is this something that we're really just gonna smile about? You know, and so to really understand that your facial expression is going to be key.
So do you have any tips for how students can, get closer to a realistic portrayal of the character and avoid that tendency to over dramatize? That's a hard one.
Yeah, it is. No, it is. And a lot of it is, there's a lot of subtlety involved in it. And so obviously the more experience you have, the better. But even within a season, you can gain a lot of experience. The more times you give your speech, the better. My kids have always had to do their speeches outside of competition. So, we're giving them to every audience we can patch together, because you get very different kinds of feedback than, just sort of the NCFCA presentation mode. When you're giving it to the library ladies down at your local library, because they're going to give you a different kind of response and feedback. And so as you give it to different types of audiences, you get a much broader sort of feedback on it. And that's always been helpful to us. So we have the neighbors over, we do it at the library, we have, do it for kids if it's appropriate for kids, for a younger set. We've always had lots of younger siblings that we can bring their friends in, that sort of thing.
That's helpful. Yeah, good encouragement. You learn so much from presenting in front of different audiences and see how they react. Heather, did you have anything to add to that?
Yes, the same exact thing, especially too, like how big your audience or environment is. That to me is key to understand if you're in that bigger room or in a smaller room, and understand it's going to be different when you're doing it for 3 people versus 40. And so, your volume has to change and whatnot. I love recording and seeing what is happening live. So it's always different. My kids, by the time they do their speech for me over and over and over again, they're not doing it the same way that they're doing it in a room at a tournament. And so seeing it live is also a key for a coach, specifically, so that oh, well, I'm now seeing it a little bit differently. And, sometimes even when I'm coaching online, it's very different than when you're doing it live. So in front of a mirror, oftentimes I tell kids to, if they're doing a duo or even a single, at night, if your lights are on and outside is dark, your windows become almost like full mirrors. And so doing it, especially for duo partners who might not be sitting there watching each other while they're doing it, so what they're doing. So you can understand, oh, now I see what you're doing. Now I can react to that even better.
That's really good. Yeah. I think the reactions are where a lot of the subtleties come in, and practice is really the key for that. I think recording yourself is definitely helpful from the competitor side of my experience. I know it's painful to sit down and watch your presentation. But I think that's where you identify where your tendency is to over dramatize. And the reality is that's going to be different for everyone. I know for me, one of the big things was I have the overly expressive Latin eyebrows. So any sad scene, my eyebrows were just all over the place, and it became too, when people cry in really tough scenarios, they don't usually cry and move their eyebrows so much. There's a lot of subtlety and a lot of experiencing the turmoil internally, but you don't really catch that when you're on the presenter side. So I think watching it a lot of times can give you insight. And then my other encouragement would be, from the student perspective, be observant of people who are similar to the character that you're trying to portray, especially if there is that disparity between you're 14 years old and you're trying to portray a 30-year-old woman, or you're trying to portray an 80-year-old man. It's natural that it's going to be hard to portray that in a realistic manner. So get really good at studying people and seeing how they respond to different situations. And as those images are clear in your own mind, then your presentation is going to become more authentic as well. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to the fun topic of blocking. I know we just touched on it a little bit as we discussed character reactions, especially in duo interpretations, but what are some different ways to dive into that creative process of blocking a piece? Because some pieces give you a very clear outline of the context, but not all pieces provide that. So what are some questions students and coaches can ask as they're diving into blocking?
Well, I think you have to look at where your characters are, so where are they in history? Where are they in, general setting? Because interpretation is kind of a purist sport, we don't have the benefit of costumes or props or a stage set or anything like that. But I do think it's helpful to imagine those things, because it helps you understand where they might be and how they might move and how much space they might have and how much, clothing they're wearing, what type of clothing that is. Obviously, you're not going to have those things, but if you can visualize them and imagine them, then it helps you better define how they're moving. So that's one thing, because they all have a setting. Every piece of literature you're working with, that's one of the literary elements, is that there is in fact a setting. So it gives you a starting point, at least, for thinking about the context of where they are. They're also doing things. I mean, some of the blocking is going to be dictated by the narration in the piece. And then sometimes they're just, if you've understood their motivations, and you have worked hard to appreciate the goals that they're striving for, sometimes you can really manufacture from your own imagination some sort of indication of that, something that becomes your very own personal kind of symbol or symbolic representation of those things. But it grows out of your understanding of the character, what they're striving for, what they're struggling against. So.
Very helpful. Heather, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, she did.
Yes.
There's never, and I think I've said this to you, Natalia, there's never any time where we're just standing as two people, talk. And if you have a big block of dialogue between one of your characters, the other person is either just going to be sitting there waiting for you to finish and just going, hurry. They need, we need to be interactive in this process. I always say speech is give and take. Okay. Mm-hmm. Even if we're doing it as a one person, if I'm doing an open interpretation, I bring it up like backyard volleyball. Okay. I'm volleying the ball over to my judges. I'm hoping for a reaction. Oh, great, Natalia, you smiled. I now have the ball back in my court, and I'm now lobbying it back over. In the case of duo interpretation, I am now lobbying it back and forth here, and we're also trying to get it over to the audience. And so it's a give and take, a reaction and action type of situation that we are trying to do. So when we are discussing things, we're responding as well. So if I say, the sky is falling, I shouldn't be like, oh, yeah. I should be like, oh, I need to be reacting to what you just said. So does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. I think what I took from that is a lot of the blocking is going to come from reactions to those emotional scenarios. So you have to first understand what are the struggles that are being portrayed in the story. And then you have to visualize it. I know there were even times when I would sketch out, what does this room look like that I'm going to be participating in this particular scene?
Right.
Sometimes I would even rearrange furniture in the physical room I was in practice, obviously. We're not talking about competition. But I would rearrange things, okay, in this scene, the bed is going to be behind me. There's a nightstand here. Let me move some things around and actually feel what it is like to portray the scene in the real context of these physical settings. Just because you're not going to have those props with you and you're not going to have the physical set when you're in competition doesn't mean that you can't practice with those physical items.
Please do. If you're going to be sweeping, then take the broom. I'm the worst sweeper ever imaginary. I love it for real, but no, please do. And moms don't only mix bowls. They don't, they're not, or wash dishes, so come up with scenarios that you can try and explore, either individually or as a duo partner in interpretation.
Excellent. Okay, well, we're going to dive into the giveaway here. And so just brief break for the giveaway, and then we'll come back to answering questions. Yay, you have the demo here. So do you want to read off the titles?
Games and Icebreakers book. And then here is a duo, the Ultimate Duo Handbook. So both of these are our giveaways. So thanks for coming tonight.
Excellent. Okay, and those giveaway winners are Claire Lamar and Ava Allen. So Claire and Ava, if you could drop your email into the chat section, that'll just go to us as the panelists. And if you could let us know what your preference is for the giveaway of those two options. There isn't really a way for us to see just based off of your name if you're a coach or a student. So if you could let us know which one would be most applicable to you, we'll make sure that you get that giveaway afterwards. So thank you for submitting questions and engaging, and glad that we could offer that as an opportunity. So with that, we'll jump back over into answering some of the specific questions that have been submitted. And just to launch that off, I know a couple of people asked where they can find those NCFCA character worksheets, and those are inside of the NCFCA Comprehensive Guide to Speech. That resource is available on the website. If you're not familiar with it already, you can go to the resources section and order a copy or learn more about the resource. But the particular pages that we are referencing are the worksheets that in the coach's guide are page 40, 41, and 82, and 83. And as a special gift to those who signed up for this webinar, we'll actually be emailing out a sample of those worksheets for you to work through tomorrow in the follow-up email. So not to worry, all those questions will be in your inbox tomorrow. But with that, let's tackle some of these great questions that have been submitted. So we'll start off with Mindy Husband asked, how many different characterization actions should you give to each character? And I think she's talking here about the physical expressions.
Well, I think it will depend on how much your character does. I mean, a very minor character who doesn't appear a lot, isn't going to have near as much. If you have one very, very, very dynamic character who's going to go through stages of growth over the piece, then that needs to, the character obviously needs to change.
Right, like something like Anne Shirley, she's going to be going through, tons of expressions, but a minor character might just have minor stuff. And they don't necessarily have to have the same pose throughout, which is something I know Christy and I have seen too, So if this is somebody, who is easily distinguished, in her mannerism, if I have a voice like this, I don't need to necessarily give them a character pose. We can kind of tell. So their character pose, I wouldn't have to have my hand on my hip to portray that character. So some of that is going to be depending on how many characters you have throughout.
That's a good encouragement. Yeah, and I'm thinking for a piece like The Christmas Carol and how your boys chose to portray that, they added a lot of physical expressions to some of those characters because it fit very well with that piece.
Not all pieces are like The Christmas Carol. They wanted to do something, they wanted, one of their ghosts was Jamaican. Again, you guys will all get access to the full video, but they wanted to make them unique and different and not what you necessarily thought of with a traditional Christmas Carol.
Right. Yeah. And as an encouragement, if you're struggling with pieces that do require more subtlety and your tendency is to go for the stereotypes, I would encourage you again to go back to understanding the character and then observe how similar people, whether in movies or real people in your life, respond to different situations. It could be things as small as, someone tensing up the muscles in their jaw when they're stressed out. That's not as easy as, I'm going to, twirl my curl as I talk, but it can be a very distinct way of showing who the character is. So sometimes you just have to dive into what are those small expressions that reveal what a person is really feeling, and that will add some life to your character. Okay, Rebecca has a really good question. She said, should I be blocking or moving all of the time in my speech? And she's talking particularly about an open.
I think it's less necessary in an open than in a duo. I think duos are one of the hallmarks of a duo, really is that synchronized movement between the two actors. But in an open, I think there can be tremendous power in stillness. And in, again, it depends on, what your character's doing, what your character's trying to express. Sometimes you have a character who's flat stuck. And if they really are stuck mentally, you don't want them physically moving around, or that's not congruent with where they are. So there's a whole lot there in that question. There's not just a real easy answer, but I don't think it's required that they move all the time.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, another question. This one is very interesting. It makes me curious about what the piece is. And now with all the new questions that have come in, it's no longer at the top. So let's see if I can remember it from memory. They essentially said, now I really do need to read it. Okay, so while I find that question, let's answer another question from Mindy that says, how can you know when to say lines in unison in a duo and when to split lines between partners?
I love saying lines together as a duo. If you use it too much, it loses its impact. So for me, I'm always looking for, ooh, this is a great line that we can say together. I'll give you an example. Last year, my son and his duo partner had kind of the theme in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, are you a man or are you a monster? They brought it up in the intro, and it was also asked then later, who was the man and who was the monster? And, just bringing those really together and having them say it together just kind of went, ooh, that was impactful, lasting that.
That's really what would fall into the category of special effects. I mean, and like if you're watching a movie, the special effects are great. They add a lot, but there comes a point where, okay, the fight has lasted too long. Okay? Like enough already. And, or we've seen that. And so they have to be sprinkled in. You can't overdo that, or you really do. It does become tiresome for the ear. But I do think it's effective. Yeah. In small doses.
Great tips. Okay, I found the elusive question. It's from the Webster family, and they asked, what if I'm playing a piece with no setting at all, like reading a law or a bill or a petition or an amendment?
Right. So that, I think we're going to see a lot more of that this year in oratorical interpretation.
Yeah.
So I've been doing a workshop on oratorical interpretation. And so I think in this event, there's less requirement of that exact thing of you know, a prop and an action that goes with that prop, but you still are playing a persona who's delivering that. And there's room there for your interpretation, like, of that person. Is it somebody you want us to admire? Then don't do something that we would be offended by, you know?
Yeah.
If you don't want us to think highly of your speaker, then there are things you can do to make the speaker more irritating. You know, so things like that still layer in a whole lot of depth and meaning to some of those characters. Oratorical particularly, and even you know, depending on what you're doing with your biblical interpretations this year, isn't necessarily a story. And so I think this is new ground, and I'm super excited about it. I think a lot is going to come down to the vocal interpretation in the events. And so I think there's tremendous room there for vocal expressiveness, for inflection, enunciation, for a lot more facial expression to take really the center scene instead of the sort of shock and awe blocking that we see.
Well, and interpret it in, this is your interpretation, and how are you interpreting their words? And so to me, that's going to be a really cool thing for students to explore. And so I'm super excited for oratorical in particular to see how we as students of speeches are going to bring that to life.
That's great. Yeah, I'm excited to see those speeches this year for sure. Okay, so a student asked, would you recommend doing an accent if you're not confident at all?
No.
No.
A good, strong answer. It's always nice.
No, in fact, I will even tell kids that I coach that here's a really great idea. And they're like, okay, this is new. And I'm like, wait a minute here. If you can't win it and sell it, then don't do it. Because I want you as a speaker and a student to be as comfortable as possible. Now, it could mean that you add your accent later. You know, there are tons of great videos on YouTube and coaches that, you know, specifically can help you with accents. And it might be that you don't have it for the first tournament, but you keep working on it and keep working on it. And by maybe the second or third, you have that Polish accent or Russian accent or whatever it is. And then you're confident and comfortable, but don't just throw it in and anyone
Hope
can do
for the best. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Christy, anything to add?
Yeah, it's not a requirement. An accent is definitely not a requirement.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you've got that skill and you want to use it, that's great. If you don't, it's not, I would definitely not force it. And I would definitely not do it poorly, because that works against you.
There are things that our voices can do without an accent at all. Like, you know, back in the beginning, you know, my son Jonah wouldn't even do a Southern drawl. When to me, I'm like, a Southern drawl seems like the easiest accent. And he was like, no way. But, you know, we can slow our sounds so that we are slower, so we can have a slower character. We could have a very fast character. I haven't done anything with my voice, you know, right. Or I can be louder. And so there are things that I know that everyone feels like, oh, I need to have accents. And it's like, no, you can even just use your own to differentiate their voices.
Great tips. Okay, I know we're getting to the end of our time here, but just a couple more questions. Mindy wants to know, how can you balance drama and humor effectively in a story that includes both without taking away from or shortchanging one or both of those themes? And Christy, I'm going to direct this one to you, because I know you wrote that article on humor for the NCFCA curriculum, and you have some really great thoughts on this.
Yeah. I think humor is so important, and I think I really think it's important that we learn how to handle humor well. I think it's an important appeal that we have to many, many audiences in many, many different settings. Humor is a tension break. It's comic relief. And sometimes in your most dramatic stories, it's required. Your judges really need that. Your master writers understand this. So you look at those Shakespearean tragedies and they all have a comic relief character in them. And it doesn't take away from the heaviness of the fall of those tragic heroes. It really doesn't. We grieve with them when they fall and when they go that way. But it gives us a chance to catch our breath. And it actually, in many ways, prevents us from becoming mired in the heaviness of those emotions. And so I think there's a great place for humor to just not diminish the drama, but relieve it for a moment. And so I think there's a great use for that. I think by the same token, if you're doing a piece that's primarily funny, there may be a very serious undertone to the overall message that you're trying to communicate there, which is worth pointing out in a more serious way, so that we take it as a serious message and we don't just laugh it off and say, ha ha, very funny. That we really take it to heart and we walk away with that as, something we want to ponder, and it stays with us. So
very helpful. Okay. That's great. So another question from a coach perspective is, what recommendations can you make for coaches and parents who are helping students who are unmotivated or complacent with characterization of their pieces? And she said, of course, prayer would always be a part of it. But any other practical tips for that?
Well, you're not going to make them do something they just don't want to do. I mean, you're not. That's a battle. I know Heather struggles with kids. I struggle with kids. Your own kids are the worst. I'll tell you, other people's kids will work for you better than your own usually. But it really does have to be personal. There has to be a personal connection between the speaker and the material in order for it to really shine out of them. It really does. Mm-hmm. And so it may be a matter of you finding ways to help them connect better with the character, and that would give a greater opportunity to
or finding the piece that they are really interested in. And that sometimes can be a balance. Working in a small group can sometimes give them the motivation to the plan of attack. I always talk about making sure that, okay, here's your deadline, and when on this date we're doing it for these people. That sometimes makes motivation, but a lot of times if they're not feeling it, it might be the piece. It really might be the piece.
Very helpful. And I would agree from a competitor standpoint. Sometimes it is a matter of, if there's someone the student works really well with, maybe another student who's a little bit older and can play that role of a mentor who the student looks up to, it might be that relational thing where it's just easier to hear feedback from someone other than your parent. And that might just be part of the growing process. I know I had siblings who went through that, and they got to a point where they loved getting feedback from the parent, but maybe there are times when you just experiment with what the context for coaching can be to make them feel more comfortable.
I work with a lot of kids that the parent is right there, with them, and they are saying, I've said this to them. And I'm like, I know, it's just different when I say it.
Yep, part of the growing process.
It is. So, I mean, Christy and I both, work with each other's kids because it's just enough someone different than us.
Yeah. And sometimes, just throwing out a couple more ideas too, sometimes a duo, this isn't necessarily the answer for everyone, but sometimes having a partner to feed off of it in energy in the beginning can be a great learning experience and make the getting started process for an introvert more fun. That's another possibility. Okay, Jay Mosby wants to know, what is a good way to communicate a time jump? Do you have any ideas for him on how to do that?
If you watch the video of Newman doing, because they had to go in and out of the ghost scenes, they did different things for different transitions. A popular transition right now is the or the that right now is a very popular, instead of doing a spin or whatnot, play with it. That's the cool thing about speech, is that the way one person does it is not the way it has to be done.
Yeah.
And so your interpretation of the time jump, it's just a matter of finding it and figuring it out. And that's what's fun about it, is that there's no rules as far as there are rules. Yes, there are rules, but there's no rules as far as what your time jump can look like.
Right. Yes.
You have to just play around with it. I think that the more things you experiment with and try, something will just feel exactly right.
Yep.
So.
Great. Okay. Well, I know we could just continue on with these questions all night long, it seems, because as we answer them, more come in. But it is time to wrap up tonight's session. So thank you to all who joined us live. This has been a really fun conversation. I hope that you've been inspired just by the excitement and the energy, by the demo. I think if there's anything that I've been reminded of in this time is how fun interpretations can be. And they really can form how you view the world, how you think about people, how you understand people and empathize with them. And I'm just thrilled for everyone who joined us live this evening, who's going to watch the recording, for them to go through that experience and to present an interpretation. So I hope that you have fun with it as you go out and prepare your pieces and develop your characters and block your stories. As a reminder, if you have rules questions, submit those to the speech committee. You can do that easily on the NCFCA website. And we will make sure to follow up with you in our email tomorrow to provide the sample character worksheets so you can see what's available in the NCFCA Comprehensive Guide to Speech. We will also send you the link with the full duo presentation that we launched tonight off with in the beginning, so that you can get some resolution to the story of the Christmas Carol and prepare for this month of December that we're getting very close to. So Heather and Christy, thank you for joining us tonight. I hope you'll have a wonderful evening.
Thanks so much for having us. We are super glad to be here.
Yes.
Alrighty. Well, thank you, everyone. Good night.
Bye.